The sun was slowly setting behind the horizon, casting its final rays of light onto a luxurious villa situated on the Miami coast. Jonathan Kane stood on the balcony, holding a glass of expensive whiskey, watching as the waves lazily rolled onto the sand. He was 42 years old and had everything one could ever dream of. Millions in bank accounts, his own construction empire, expensive cars, a private jet, and women ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. But that evening he had no idea that he would soon lose it all because of one fateful encounter. When he returned to the living room, a company of friends and business partners had already gathered. Champagne flowed like a river, live jazz played in the background, and the air was filled with the scent of expensive perfumes and cigars. He hadn't planned anything special, just an ordinary evening in his style. But suddenly his attention was caught by a woman who hadn't been there before. She stood by the panoramic window, elegantly holding a glass of red wine. A long black dress clung perfectly to her figure, and her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in waves. She was beautiful, the kind of dangerous beauty that could destroy a man if he were foolish enough to yield to temptation. "Who is she?" Jonathan asked his friend Mark in a low voice. "Oh, that's Vanessa Loren," he replied with a smile. "She's a model, an actress, a socialite, and one of those women who never say no." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. His interest only grew. He approached Vanessa, filled his glass with wine, and greeted her warmly. "Hope you're enjoying the evening." Vanessa looked at him, her dark eyes sparkling. "Now that you're here, the evening just got a lot more interesting," she replied with a gentle smile. Jonathan was a man who always got what he wanted. And now he wanted Vanessa, but he did not know that this very woman would become his greatest mistake. Jonathan had always considered himself an experienced player in love. Women came and went, and his interest in them quickly faded. But with Vanessa, everything was different. She didn't rush to become just another accessory on his arm. She made him wait, doubt, and desire more. Their romance unfolded as swiftly as a storm approaching a city. Jonathan took Vanessa to the finest restaurants in New York, arranged private yacht trips for her, and showered her with expensive gifts. It seemed as though she accepted it all as if it were expected, never showing any excessive excitement. "I'm not like the others, John," she said, running her fingers over the precious necklace he had given her. "I can't be bought." And that was exactly what drove him crazy. Once, when they were vacationing in St. Tropez, Vanessa invited him to a party with her friends. Jonathan didn't like it when the game wasn't played by his rules, but he couldn't refuse. The villa where the party was held was luxurious, even by his standards. The guests were influential businessmen, artists, models. Wine flowed in abundance, and loud music mingled with laughter and whispers. When he returned from the terrace, Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. He found her in another room. She was sitting next to a young man, laughing, touching his hand. Something inside him clenched. Jealousy? Jonathan had long forgotten what that felt like. "Can I have a word with you?" he said coldly as he grabbed her hand. When they stepped out onto the balcony, he clenched his fist. What was that all about? Vanessa smiled like a child caught doing mischief. "Oh, Jonathan, you're so predictable. Are you playing with me?" She moved closer, letting her fingers glide over his chest. "Maybe you're the one playing with me?" That night, he realized that he had already lost. But it was only the beginning of his downfall. With each passing day, Vanessa captivated Jonathan's mind even more. She was at times cold, at other times passionate. She would disappear for several days without explanation and then return as if nothing had happened. He felt himself losing control but couldn't stop. She began subtly hinting at her desires. First, it was expensive jewelry. Then, an apartment in downtown New York. Jonathan bought everything without a second thought. But one day, Vanessa asked for more. "I have an idea for a business," she said during dinner at an elite restaurant. "A modeling agency. But I need an investor." "And how much?" he asked indifferently, though he already knew he would give her any sum. $500,000 to start. He merely smiled. To him, that was pocket change. By the very next day, the money was transferred into her account. But Vanessa didn't stop there. She introduced him to her friends who supposedly had lucrative business ideas. Blinded by passion, Jonathan agreed to invest money without checking the details. He was used to trusting his instincts, but this time they betrayed him. His financial director Mark tried to warn him. "You've changed, John. You're throwing money away. Vanessa, she's using you." "You don't understand anything," Jonathan snapped. "I only understand one thing. If you don't stop, you will lose everything." Jonathan just laughed. He couldn't even imagine how right Mark was. For ruin was already at the door. A year passed. Jonathan still had money, but his financial situation began to wobble. The projects he had invested in on Vanessa's recommendation were not profitable. Some of them turned out to be outright fraudulent schemes. Yet he refused to admit it. One night, he was woken by a phone call. "Jonathan, it's Mark. We have serious problems." "What problems?" "Your accounts are emptying. We've lost millions." Jonathan sat on his bed, clutching the phone. "This is temporary. Everything will balance out soon. If you don't start thinking with your head, you'll lose it all." He hung up, but inside he felt Mark wasn't exaggerating. Meanwhile, Vanessa was changing. She became increasingly cold, less interested in communicating. More and more often she would vanish, only to return with new demands. Once, when he tried to talk to her about business, she merely shrugged. "I'm not a financier, John. You're the one who understands numbers. But it was you who convinced me to invest in these projects. You're an adult," she smiled. "You made the decisions yourself." Jonathan realized something had changed, but he still didn't understand that the worst was yet to come. The financial problems could no longer be ignored. Jonathan tried to save his business, selling assets and seeking new opportunities, but money was slipping away like sand through his fingers. One evening, he arrived at Vanessa's home unannounced. He wanted to talk, to seek support, but the door was opened by a man in an expensive suit. "Who are you?" Jonathan asked, feeling anger boiling in his chest. "And who are you?" the stranger replied with a smile. In a moment, Vanessa appeared in the hallway. She looked shocked but quickly composed herself. "Jonathan, you shouldn't have come without calling first." "Who is this?" "It doesn't matter." He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "All that I did for you, did it mean nothing?" Vanessa only sighed. "John, you were an interesting chapter in my life, but all stories come to an end." His eyes darkened. You used me? You allowed it to happen." Jonathan said nothing. He simply turned and walked away. But the downfall had only just begun. After that night, Jonathan realized he had lost everything. Vanessa had left, the business was crumbling, and his accounts were empty. Once he was a king. Now even his most trusted partners wouldn't answer the phone. One day, lawyers came to his office. "Mr. Kane," one began, "you have serious debts. If you don't find money soon, you'll have to sell off your assets." "How much time do I have?" "A few weeks." Jonathan clenched his fists. He couldn't believe that it would all end like this. He tried to contact Vanessa, but her phone was disconnected. Then he decided to visit her personally. But her apartment was empty. A neighbor said that Vanessa had left a few days ago. She sold her apartment and flew off to Paris. Jonathan felt everything around him spinning. She had fled. With his money, he had nothing left. But this was not the end of his story. Jonathan sat in his former living room, which was on the verge of being taken over by the bank. Empty whiskey bottles lay on the table, surrounded by papers, financial reports, debt obligations, court notices. Just a year ago, he was one of the most influential people in New York. And now, just a man who had lost everything because of his own folly. One day, Mark came to him. "John, listen to me. You still have a chance to start over." "Start over?" Jonathan bitterly laughed. "I'm bankrupt. The press mocks me. I've lost my business, my house. All because of a woman." "No," Mark said firmly. "It's all because of you." Jonathan looked at him. "You made your choice. You refused to listen to me. You let her control you. And now, if you want to survive, make the right choice. His friend's words hit him like a cold shower. Perhaps not all was lost, but the road back up was long and arduous. Jonathan sold everything he still had. Cars, watches, remnants of his business. Everything went to cover his debts. His villa was taken away, and he moved into a small rented apartment in Brooklyn. Many considered him a vanished man, but he did not give up. Thanks to Mark, he found a small opportunity, consulting beginners in real estate. Once he had run an empire, and now he was teaching young entrepreneurs how not to repeat his mistakes. At first, it was humiliating. He was offered mere pennies. His name evoked only pitying looks. But he worked. For the first time in many years, he truly worked. A few months passed. There was only enough money for rent and food, but he felt he was changing. And one day he received a phone call that could change everything. "Mr. Kane," said a voice on the line. "My name is Michael Ross. I want you to help me with a project." That was his chance. But he did not yet know whether he could make proper use of it. Michael Ross was a young, ambitious entrepreneur who wanted to build a network of elite apartments in Los Angeles. He had heard of Jonathan, knew of his downfall, but also understood that he had once been one of the best. "You've made mistakes," he said during their meeting. "But your experience is priceless. I want you to work with me." Jonathan hesitated. His reputation was ruined. Who would trust him with large sums of money? "Why me?" "Because you know what it means to lose everything. And that means you know the price of success." Jonathan accepted the proposal. It was not his empire, not his rules, but it was a chance. He worked tirelessly. He studied the market, negotiated with investors, developed projects. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that he was once again in control of his life. A year passed. The project was launched and became successful. Jonathan received his share, enough to return to the game. Then, one evening at a restaurant, he saw a familiar face. Vanessa. She was sitting at a table with another wealthy man, laughing, touching his hand just as she once had with him. Their eyes met. She looked surprised, then barely smiled as if nothing had happened. Jonathan merely nodded and walked away. He was no longer the man she had once destroyed. Jonathan never tried to find Vanessa again. She was a part of his past, a painful but important part. That evening, upon seeing her, he realized she had not changed. She continued to play the same game with other men with other money. But now he understood that he was not a victim but a man who had made the wrong choice. It took him 2 years to become successful again. He no longer chased fame, no longer sought quick money. He worked smarter, investing only in what truly held value. One day, while sitting in his new office, a young businessman approached him with desperation in his eyes. "Mr. Kane, I made a foolish mistake. I lost almost everything because of a woman I trusted." Jonathan looked at him and smiled. "Tell me your story," he said. Now he knew that his greatest failure had become his most valuable lesson. For the worst falls can be the beginning of a new life. After returning to business, Jonathan realized one important thing: success was no longer his main goal. He no longer aspired to be the richest or the most famous. His new focus became balancing work with personal life and, most importantly, adhering to his own principles. One day, after a long meeting with clients, he went to the American Southwest for a break. Jonathan needed a pause. And that was exactly what he needed to set his thoughts in order. He arrived in a small town by the ocean. There he rented a little house, a quiet, secluded retreat, and began spending time reflecting on everything that had happened in his life. From time to time he communicated with Mark, but mostly he was alone. This was his recovery. On the beach he met Claire, a middle-aged woman who owned a local cafe. She had a different outlook on life and was not swayed by societal stereotypes. Jonathan realized that this was exactly what he had been missing: genuine simplicity and a deep understanding of oneself. Their friendship grew gradually. They talked a lot about life, relationships, and the changes in the world. From Claire he learned much about the importance of inner harmony and self-respect. That period of rest became a moment of realization for Jonathan: how important it was not only to have money or success, but to be at peace with oneself. He understood that to achieve true happiness, one must stop competing with others and focus on personal goals. That break was a very important stage for him. He returned to the city with renewed strength, but with different priorities. After his break, Jonathan felt his strength returning. He changed his approach to business and began paying more attention not only to finances but also to the people he worked with. His interactions with Claire helped him realize that without humanity you cannot build a successful business. Returning to New York, he began working with new investors, but this time he chose those who shared his values. Instead of chasing quick profit, he looked for opportunities for long-term investments that would not only bring money but also improve the quality of life for people. One of these projects was an initiative to restore old buildings in the city center. He invested not only money but also his soul into this project, striving to create a neighborhood where people could live comfortably and securely. With each successful project, Jonathan felt his self-confidence restored. His business began to thrive again, but now it was only part of a greater goal, building a sustainable future where every step of his work was thoughtful and played an important role in community development. However, not everything was perfect. From time to time he faced unforeseen difficulties. Some projects did not meet expectations, while others proved more complex than he had thought. But now Jonathan knew how to respond to failures properly, without panic, only with the understanding that every setback is a step toward a great victory. This new approach to business brought not only financial success but also personal fulfillment. He found a balance between his career and personal life. One day, Jonathan received an invitation to an event hosted by one of the country's biggest businessmen, Den Roberts. It was a planned event where future investments in new technologies and infrastructure were to be discussed. For Jonathan, this was an important moment, a chance not only to showcase himself but also to take another step in building his new business image. However, at the event he met someone familiar who sent a chill down his spine. It was Kenneth, a former partner with whom he had worked before things began to go downhill. As it turned out, Kenneth was one of those who had once steered him towards certain deals that eventually led to his downfall. "Jonathan," Kenneth said with a slight smile, "you look good. It seems your return to the game is truly successful. How did you do it?" Jonathan felt cold waves of anger piercing his heart. But he controlled himself. He couldn't afford to make a mistake in his actions now. "I changed my approach, Kenneth. Now I believe that business should not only bring money but also improve people's lives," he said, pausing. "I believe in sustainability and honesty." Kenneth laughed as if not understanding the gravity of the situation. He subtly tossed a remark to his old partner. "And I suppose you've come to understand that money is everything, haven't you? All this honesty and sustainability might sound good, but true success comes to those who have no such principles." Jonathan looked at him calmly and decided not to waste any more time on empty talk. His goal was clear, and he had no intention of returning to his old mistakes. After that, he went home feeling complete. He no longer sought to impress people like Kenneth. His benchmarks had changed entirely. He had found his true purpose and saw the world through different eyes. That evening he talked with Claire again. They sat on the terrace for a long time, discussing everything that had happened in their lives and how important it was not to lose oneself, even when the whole world around you is changing. Time passed, and Jonathan continued to gain momentum in his business. However, during all that time he began to realize that his greatest victory was not in successful deals or growing capital. He understood that the most important thing was inner peace and knowing that you were on the right path. Jonathan decided to take another important step in his life. He organized a meeting with people he had once worked with, including those who might have doubted him after he lost everything. At the event held in his new office, he openly spoke about his mistake, his loss, and how he had changed. "I want you to know," he began, looking at those present, "that every defeat has its meaning. I experienced a loss that I wouldn't wish on anyone, but from that loss I learned a very important lesson. And now, as I return to business, I am no longer the same Jonathan." Everyone listened intently. For many it was unexpected. Jonathan, who had once been an unyielding millionaire, was now openly talking about his weaknesses and mistakes. But that was the moment that changed everything. This meeting became a turning point not only for Jonathan but also for those in attendance. Many began to reconsider their attitude towards money and success. They realized that to achieve great goals, it's not enough to merely possess money or power. True success is being true to your convictions, helping others, and not being afraid to change. The next day, Jonathan received several proposals for cooperation, but now with different conditions, with the aim of creating projects that were not only profitable but also ethical. He was offered the role of mentor for several startups that prioritized social responsibility over mere financial gain. This was a true victory not over other people but over his own fear and doubts. Jonathan finally understood that business isn't just about money. It's about how you influence the world and the legacy you leave behind. He was ready for new challenges and new opportunities. And, most importantly, he now knew that nothing was more important than never forgetting who you are, even in the darkest times. Time passed, and Jonathan continued on his path, increasingly aware of how his values had changed. He shifted from short-term success to building something meaningful and lasting. His perspective on business and life in general became much deeper. One of his new projects involved revitalizing urban neighborhoods. Jonathan worked on creating spaces for people that would not only have aesthetic value but also serve as hubs for developing their creative talents. This project combined elements of culture, art, and urban life. Claire often visited him to help with ideas. She always emphasized the importance of maintaining a balance between personal and professional life. For Jonathan, this became another opportunity to reflect on whether work should come first or whether it was more important to maintain a connection with what truly matters: family, friends, and oneself. During this period, Jonathan often recalled Vanessa, the woman who had once changed his life and who had been a part of his old, ruthless world. She was like a shadow that refused to let him forget what had happened. But now he saw it as a lesson. He no longer wanted to let his past mistakes define his future. One day, after an important meeting, he received an unexpected message. It was from Mark, his old friend. The message mentioned an opportunity to pool resources for a major investment project that was beyond anything he had ever done. He understood that this could be yet another test of his moral principles. Mark asked, "Are you ready for big changes, Jonathan?" And Jonathan knew that this question wasn't just about financial decisions. It was about who he was now and who he wanted to become in the future. Everything he had achieved was no longer just about money. It was about his true contribution to the world, about whether he could be who he truly wanted to be without compromise. Jonathan decided not to rush his response to Mark. He knew this was a big step and that every stage needed careful thought. He chose to return to Claire for her advice. She had always been his inner compass, not just a friend but a wise advisor. "Claire," he began as they sat on the beach, "I received an offer that could change everything. I could make a lot of money, but it would mean entering a world of competition, of high stakes once again. Should I even go for it?" Claire looked at him, her eyes as calm as ever. She was silent for a long moment before saying, "Jonathan, you know, I've always believed that money should not be the goal but merely a tool. You've already walked the path when everything was focused on financial success. Now your aim should be different. You have a chance to leave a real mark, not just to increase your capital." Her words made an impression on him. He thought about everything he had experienced and how far he had come. Jonathan had long realized that true success isn't measured solely by money but by how you change the world and help others. He no longer wanted to live only for himself. That very evening, he called Mark and turned down the offer. "I appreciate the opportunity, but I don't want to dive back into a world where everything is reduced to money. My goal is to leave something more than just financial achievements behind. I'm looking for genuine impact, not just profit." Mark was surprised, yet he respected Jonathan's decision. They continued to communicate, but now as friends rather than business partners. Jonathan understood that every choice he made now carried more meaning than any deal. Ultimately, he decided to invest in projects that supported education, ecology, and culture. Claire helped him with several ideas, and together they established a fund to support young entrepreneurs and creative people striving to change the world for the better. This was his true success, not measured in money but in how he influenced the future. Every year, Jonathan and Claire worked on new initiatives and projects. They helped invest in startups that promoted environmental sustainability and social impact and supported young entrepreneurs who were creating innovative solutions for urban development and improving quality of life. Over time, Jonathan realized that his main goal was now these very projects, not merely financial gain. After several years of working in this direction, Jonathan was no longer the man who dreamed of endless millions. He became someone who had restored his inner balance and understood the true meaning of money as a tool, not an end in itself. Sometimes he recalled Vanessa, and although the pain and disappointment of that story were still part of his past, he no longer felt broken. Now he was a whole person, ready to use his mistakes as a foundation for further growth. One day, Jonathan went to meet one of the largest investors who had taken an interest in their fund. It was an important moment because the opportunity to secure a significant investment in their project could change everything. During the meeting, the investor asked, "Why did you change your strategy? Earlier, you were solely focused on profit, on foolproof deals. Now it seems you've shifted your focus to social responsibility. What prompted this change?" Jonathan replied calmly, looking into the man's eyes. I realized that when you do something solely for the sake of money, you always find yourself at the edge of a moral choice. I don't want to be part of a system that blindly chases profit at any cost. I want to build a future that benefits people. My success is now measured by how many changes I can effect in this world and by how honestly I do it. The investor was silent for a few seconds before replying. That's an interesting perspective. You don't often encounter people like you. I'm ready to invest in your project if it means we can change the world for the better. This was a small victory but very important. For Jonathan, it was a confirmation that his new path was the right one. He understood that the success he had once pursued in business now lay in something much greater. And although he didn't forget his past experiences, he was now ready to move forward with new understanding and new goals. It wasn't just business, it was a mission. Jonathan continued working on projects aimed at changing the world. Yet despite all his achievements, he increasingly realized that besides money and success, there was something even more important, a legacy he would leave behind. It wasn't just about material accomplishments, but about how his actions would affect future generations. He often recalled his first monumental failure, the moment when everything was ruined by his own choices. But now he felt that that failure was part of his journey. It wasn't an ending but the beginning of something far greater. Looking back, he saw that every step he had taken had led to the discovery of a new meaning in life. Jonathan began to pay more attention to the relationships with people dear to him. He started to value time spent with Claire again, and he maintained connections with old friends. All those small moments together became the true meaning of his life. One evening, he sat with Claire on the roof of their house, watching the sunset. They had long ceased worrying about the little things and simply enjoyed the silence. Claire looked at him and said, "Jonathan, you've realized that the most important thing in life isn't what you've achieved, but how you treat people and the world around you. And you've truly changed. Now, your legacy is not just your successes but how you've transformed others. I'm proud to be with you." Her words filled his heart with warmth. He understood that the best thing he could leave behind was not millions or material goods, it was the people whose lives were changed by his ideas, his help, and his support. Later, Jonathan decided to establish a foundation in memory of his father, who had always been his greatest example of strength and determination. He gathered money to help children from underprivileged families receive an education as well as to invest in projects that supported startups in the field of social innovation. This foundation became his most important endeavor, for it wasn't just financial aid, it was a way to pass on knowledge and experience to future generations. Jonathan now understood that true wealth isn't simply money, it's how you use your resources to help others. And although he was still able to earn millions, he no longer pursued wealth for its own sake. His true riches were the people he inspired and helped. And so, after years of struggle and self-searching, Jonathan realized that with every step along this path he was finding true meaning. Having lost everything, he found what really mattered. This story became not only a lesson for him but a lesson for everyone who followed his journey. Don't be afraid to change, don't be afraid to make mistakes, because even in the darkest times there is a chance to build something real. Something that will last for generations. Life is not made up solely of successes or failures, it is always a balance between them, and it is that balance that forms our true path. After all these years, through all the experiences and setbacks, Jonathan realized one important thing. The most important aspect of life isn't the amount of money or titles you've acquired, but how you use what you have to change the lives of others. He was ready to share this wisdom with everyone around him. At one of the important gatherings organized by his foundation, he gave a speech in which he shared his experience. "I have made many mistakes in life. I accumulated wealth, yet lost my soul. I strived to achieve something great, but forgot what truly matters," he said. You might ask, what made you change your approach? And I would answer, I realized that true success isn't measured in money. It's measured by what we leave behind. And it doesn't necessarily have to be millions. It can be good deeds, the people we inspire, the projects that change lives. Looking at the audience, Jonathan continued, "I made many mistakes, but those mistakes became my lessons. And today, I can say that the greatest wealth I've gained isn't just my business success, but the opportunity to be part of a significant change. I've learned that the most valuable thing is to help others, to support those in need, and to change the world for the better, step by step." He looked around the room and his words seemed to have a special power. The people who heard his story realized that true success isn't about being the best in the chase for money. True success is being the best at making a difference, being honest with yourself and with others. Jonathan was no longer the ambitious businessman who once lost everything. Now he was the man who had found his true calling, changing the world and living according to his own principles. And so, in the end, the important lesson we can all take away is don't be afraid to change. It's never too late to start over. It isn't about how many times we fall, but how many times we get back up. Sometimes, to find your true place in life, you must go through many hardships. But it is these hardships that make us who we are. The true value of life isn't found in money or achievements, it's in how we help others, how we build the future, and how we learn from every step along our journey. This is Jonathan's story, a reminder that the most important thing is not only to be successful but to be a person with a heart who wants to change the world for the better.